Afaa, Michael Weaver. And I just like him. I like poets who like tell stories and kind of like people from like a lot of poets from the South. They can capture a lot in one poem. Borders. I have seen lines on a paper turn 4-lane highways to roads, snaking through clusters of pine, raise foot-high grass and medians, pull the tongues of people to a drawl, tighten the air and fill it with honey, put the hands of women on their hips, stand them in peanut fields with straw hats, slow the paces of men to crawl and sit, them on the gas pumps of one-room stores, scratch belligerence in the eyes of whites. I have gone south in summer nights, watching the sun rise haughty and oppressive. I have felt God tinker with man's differences, moving through our quartered spaces, making strangers of the same flesh and blood. Okay. And what I'm reading is like, it's kind of like inspired by Maya Angelou and Michael Weaver and Cornelius Eady, but it's also very inspired by Jordan Carnes right here, because she wrote a book called Has Not Stopped Being California Here, and she's a poet, and I, as a poet, was very intimidated by creative nonfiction, and kind of reading her too helped me kind of just like, the whole time I was at home this summer, because I go visit my mom, I have to visit my mom, and the whole time I was at home visiting her, I was just like, why isn't poetry coming out right now? Why can't I write? And then this started coming out. And then like I mixed it up with poems that kind of stem and are inspired by it. I call it a never-ending set because it keeps changing. It has already changed greatly from when I read it last, and it's going to continue changing. I take these trips to the South, and while I'm away from the South in California, I romanticize the South. The light, sweet scent of those magnolia trees with their heavy and grand shade, laying on a bed of their fallen leaves and listening to the natural bluegrass sounds of the winds and the canopies of trees that will be barren in some month's time, or listening to a creek that only exists after a heavy rain. It is easy to look at the South falling in love with the facade and forgetting the truth of the monster, the old wizened monster underneath. That is the thing about anomalies. Or maybe I'm just being naive, but I forgot that monsters could breed and there is no escape in California. But no one here has told me to stop writing about my experience as a black queer man. I have yet to be called a nigger, though there was that time on USC's campus when a group of girls walked by the bench upon which I was seated and said, I didn't know this was an HBCU. Sometimes I catch unwelcome mirrors when my nomadic nature notions my feet to move northward, though it tastes good, bitter, saccharine, and possibly brewed with lotus. I want a t-shirt that reads, sweet tea for the ignorant. My palate prefers things to be more and more bitter with age, but I still love sweet tea, even though I don't drink it. America has given blacks reasons to sing spirituals, but wants us to forget why chariots had to swing low. 4, get the future, nigger. The past does not guide your steps. Shackles don't haunt you in metaphors. Ropes don't grow from trees like they used to, but bullets splay like seeds. Cotton gin, took a life again. Cotton gin, took my lover and my friend. Cotton gin, chant of weeping mothers. Cotton gin, sung by sisters without brothers. Cotton gin, lulled to comfort children. Cotton gin, took a life again. So many names to remember, all of them boys. There were 4 girls, and many unaccounted for. That is another story from a timeline in the wilderness. Are we still wandering in Canaan? Because I see an orchard, and in it are trees, but all of them are saplings, looking towards their first fruit. However, the logger only sees trees. They will stop killing black boys when we have all been killed, when we have all been turned into paper, to be turned before it is ever written upon, when we have been turned into paper, to be burned before it is ever written upon. Trees torn down to be balled into incomplete ideas and splayed into piles to be buried. When will America know the true definition of recycle? There is no grave. There is no place at anyone's dinner table. There is only a famine. There is only a want where she used to laugh, a series of moments replaced with a question. There is no eulogy for the girl named Relisha Rudd. No one whispers her name in purgatory. I grew up in a town of concrete bridges over waters the shade of loam, home. In spring and in the summer, the shores of that river were and are flooded with dense emerald canopies that lean to dip their leaves in a telltale vein of historic conquest. Rappahannock claim, Rappahannock name. At times the waters would rise and still rise and turn violent, and the trees would get ripped from the rhizome of their homes to become drifting, ignored, and troublesome wood, damming in the concrete columns of the bridge called Chatham. The more mammoth and crumbling Falmouth stood and stands at the bottom of the fall line, where the rapids grab the most from the slopes of mud and clay. It bounces from deflection. The currents and rocks north of the bridge could kill you after a storm or give life to a kayak. But water on the south side is temperate as it canoes its way to the Chesapeake Bay. A southern cotton wood grows in my back. Yard and cotton wood make a bird sing songs about trees in a cage. Trees become wood and thump against concrete damming. A slave named John Washington crossed the river to freedom here 1 year before Lincoln proclaimed freedom. In early spring, 81 years before the Falmouth was erected. The tribes from which the river was named had a chief that cursed the river as his peoples were being ripped from the rhizome of their homes. The water shrunk and no longer allowed the passage of profitable cargo. In the winter, the river ceases, never rises. Sometimes the edges opal over with ice and frost, and the hollow trees look like withered fingers reaching for a sky of unpolished silver. There is a dis-ease in the people that floods cells with water, tears down walls, disrupting life, even stopping it altogether. There is a dis-ease in the land that builds walls as tears stream down bricks from people trying to climb over to the other side. There is a disease in the body that separates meat from bone. That river flooded one time. It floods all the time. But one time my mother says it flooded all the way to her front porch and into her basement. In that part of town in which she grew up, Crowfoot Bottom, they called it. It was and still is on the other side of the train tracks. Gentrified now. Those old dust-covered wood floors in those southern homes have been dusted, polished, and varnished to the point in which none of the old denizens I met growing up can afford them. Folks today say the gentle coo of the train lulls them to sleep in their soundproof homes. Clouds of milk in her coffee. My grandmother's cup, though decorated with lilies, was crafted from clay. And everyone knew then that porcelain was better. In it, coffee black with clouds of milk that spread like foundations built on fine features. Clouds of milk blossoming in ripples of coffee black no more. Coffee clouds and milk porcelain marbled from perfect. Vitiligo's morning sip. Dawn. I didn't know it when I was a kid as my nanny was babysitting me, but The reason he was so funny was because he was drunk all of the time. His liver gave out before he ever got an offer on his deceased father's historical home. University kids live there now. The 100-year flood, my mom called it, happens every 100 years or so. Just a really big flood. I wonder, is that flood the equivalent of the big one hitting over here? Or would the big one only affect the homes in West Oakland? Fragmented places, spaces for our fears, places where we know they are confined tightly to spore, rust, and decay amongst themselves. When I was 13 years old, I went looking for something. The house in which I grew up, my dad's house, still had many cabinets, many places where things could go to be forgotten. I went into the den and opened the cabinet doors. I still have yet to see doors like those anywhere else. Wooden frames with linen where there should have been a glass pane, and brass cross-hatching overlaid it to keep unwanted hands from touching the canvas-pulled linen between the redwood frames. No stains, you see. Since I was younger than even 13, I had a habit of and remember waving them back and forth on their hinges because the fabric in the wind sounded like the blades of helicopters landing in those movies that my parents loved to watch. And when some young man came home from Vietnam too doped up on the truth to suddenly malfunction amongst the lies of every day. I went searching in those descending helicopter blades one day and found a sketchbook. In it was a ballet of pastel flowers, page after page of gardens, better than Claude Monet's. In fact, I thought my artistic middle sister drew them, and her name happens to be Monet. No, they're Mama's. That moment was the first time my life exploded with the possibility of endless possibility. I was 13 and just finding out that my mother was and still is an artist. Her song overlaid by descending helicopter blades. She got a full ride to the Artist Institute, but got pregnant with Shatima. My mother always got home before my dad, so I confronted her with the garden in my hand. I remember the glare on her glasses as she descended her head. What about it? Was something my mother said when she didn't want to talk about something. I stopped pushing the subject when I heard my father's coal Hans on the patio announcing his arrival home from work. All of the walls in the house were white or beige. I never sat to think. My mother named my sister after an artist, introduced us to Crayola, and did all of our science projects, which were always lauded for their craftsmanship. My mother's name is Iris. I put the chorus of pastel flowers back in the chamber of December helicopter blades. It still rests there. Though my mother sleeps across town, her living room is yellow, and her bedroom is green. We no longer watch war films. The color purple plays, like a soundtrack, revolutions and fields of indigo, taking back the blues for tunes that you can swing your hips to. Oh, Miss Celia, I feel like singing. Your sister stood in golden fields while you felt the thorns of flowers that were never meant for you. You read books for paper cuts. You made pancakes for remnants of butter and syrup. They called you precious and made you a mother. Oh, Miss Celia, I feel like singing. Written to serve the product that slavery made, written to tell the story of a woman of a woman made to live on mind-crafted pages, the forgotten stages of the primary colors that made the color purple true, the verity of red and blue, the remembrance of those history-stained faces. Oh, Miss Celia, I feel like singing. The epistles of Seeley, the unmade record. I didn't learn anything new when I lived in Los Angeles. Highways are barriers on which certain people should not cross. There is no light rail to Santa Monica or Beverly Hills, and suggestions of such enrage the gentry. The water is meant to kill you. All of my female students of color hated their bodies, and many of the males were allowing machismo to steer their attention to the streets. Remember, there is a dis-ease in the land. Lost angels dry their wings from tenement balconies. Fallen birds sing in the cages on the hills. The full moon looks like a crucifix. Dead vein, concrete coffin, LA River. Chlorine crystals cake the kettle. Fresh water, profit for cleaning. Dried vein, collapsed kingdom, LA River. Blockaded spaces surrounded by the paths of machines that cough poisons into the ethereal matter that houses all of the places from which space is unbreathed. The West Oakland Project, Section 80. Walled in by way of membrane. The world outside of the barriers are drying out. The body is now pulling water from the cell. The highway is no longer a divider. Let's proletarify Oakland. Does pulled pork and ham break down the same in the gut? Does one blacken and dissolve as the other is glorified in the throat? The moat around the kingdom is molten, heart burned. Thank you.